Have you ever really thought about what it was like to live through a massive turning point in history? I mean, not as a general or a president, but just as a kid. Well, today, we're going to do just that. We're stepping back to 1865, and we're going to see the world through the eyes of a 13-year-old boy named Frank Walton Seaver.
You know, for Frank, 1865 wasn't just some date in a history book. It was the year that drew this incredibly sharp line right through the middle of his life. Everything was either before or after. It was a huge turning point, not just for the country, but for him personally, and we're about to see exactly why.
So, look at this timeline. It's wild, right? You've got these gigantic, nation-changing events. The Civil War finally ends, the president is assassinated, and then, right in the middle of all that chaos, something deeply personal happens for this one family. Frank's dad, Isaac, comes home. For Frank, history wasn't something far away. It was literally knocking on his front door.
And that's the thing. Out of all the monumental things that happened in 1865, the most important one for Frank was deeply personal. It was the return of his father from his service in Washington, D.C. This was the moment his whole world started to shift.
I mean, just think about that for a second. He's 13, and with his dad away, he wasn't just a kid anymore. He was the man of the house. He had to grow up so fast, carrying a weight of responsibility that, let's be honest, would challenge most adults even today.
And this slide just lays it out so clearly. Before his dad got back in June, the family was basically in survival mode. It was held together by the sheer will and strength of his mother, Lucretia. But after, they could finally be a complete family again. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief in that house.
Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit on this bustling household. Who were the actual people Frank was living with day in and day out?
So, Frank's right in the middle of the pack. You've got his older sister Juliet, who's basically a second mom. Then there's his younger brother Benjamin, who's his partner in crime for both chores and a bit of fun. And then you have the two little ones, Elizabeth and Nellie, who I'm sure filled their Massachusetts home with a whole lot of energy and noise. All right, now let's talk about what really filled most of Frank's days: work. And we have to be clear here. In 1865, for a boy in a working-class family, contributing wasn't about earning an allowance or getting pocket money. It was about survival. It was absolutely essential.
And this wasn't just busy work to keep him out of trouble. No way. Hauling water meant they could cook and clean. Chopping wood meant they stayed warm. Weeding that garden, that meant they wouldn't go hungry come winter. Every single one of these physically demanding chores was directly tied to his family's well-being.
But, you know, life wasn't just a constant grind of grueling work. It couldn't be. Even with all the hardship, Frank and kids just like him found ways to have fun. And this is where you really see the spirit and the resourcefulness of a 19th century kid.
Sure, Frank went to a one-room schoolhouse for the basics, you know, the 3 R's. But this chart really tells the true story. His real education came from home. The practical skills he learned from his dad in the workshop and from his mom running the household, those were way more valuable for his future than anything he was going to read in a book.
And check this out. No video games, no smartphones, obviously. Fun was something you had to make yourself. They used old barrel staves for sleds. They played baseball with homemade bats and balls. Their playground? It was the huge woods and fields all around their town. It was a world of simple, physical, and really creative fun.
So, as we pull all these pieces together, what we see is this amazing parallel picture. You've got a boy and you've got a nation, and they are both standing right on the edge of a massive transformation. 1865 was a coming-of-age story for Frank and for America itself. Think about it. All the values Frank was learning, hard work, family loyalty, practical skills, these are all things that were preparing him for a world that was, believe it or not, rapidly disappearing. The end of the war kicked off this huge industrial boom, and the rural life he knew was about to be totally reshaped by factories and cities.
And this brings us to a really interesting question for our own time. Frank was caught between two totally different worlds. It really makes you wonder, as we shift from analog to digital, or from one kind of economy to another, what major threshold are we all standing on right now? When you really strip it all down, Frank's world was built on a few core things: intense physical work, a super tight-knit family, and finding joy in the simplest things. So as we look at our own, much more complex world, it's worth asking ourselves, what are the fundamental building blocks of ours?